I recently moved to Alberta from Nova Scotia as a Sangha member in search of better employment opportunities. As would be expected, my first 6 months in Edmonton were focused on the basics of finding work, new friends, and getting acquainted with my new home. However, while focusing on the basics, there was a little promise I made to myself that I would take an excursion to the Canadian Rockies. These trips are common for Calgary and Edmonton residents as the mountains are close and can easily be reached within a day's drive. I attended the Vajradhatu seminaries at Chateau Lake Louise as a participant in 1979 and as a staff member in 1981. In 1981, there was also a Kalapa assembly following the seminary. Remembering these pivotal programs the Vidyadhara led created a further enticement for me. Perhaps a simple road trip might have a spiritual element. I could easily visit Lake Louise in a trip to Banff National Park, and that might evoke an experience of the Vidyadhara and these programs. So with a trusty camera in hand, packed along with a few necessities and dharma items, I left for a weekend trip of 4 days this past February. The weather was nice and was a little bit warmer than prior weeks, so I was happy to get in the car and depart. The photos were easy to take as the environment of Lake Louise and the Chateau Hotel are very elegant. For me, these pictures and the feeling of being there evoke a sense of happiness, lineage connection, and even a little bit of blessings. For readers who attended a Lake Louise program, these photos might call forth other personal recollections. In my experience during the trip, there was some magic that, even after 30 years, the Lake Louise environment could bring the seminary atmosphere into the present. This might seem quirky or romantic, but the images could create sparks of reminders that are personal and helpful. After several hours of a somewhat boring drive through the rolling hills of the Alberta ranch country, the Canadian Rockies were a welcome sight. I felt a little foolish, like a young boy thinking, wow, these are really big mountains. Then I remembered I had been in Nova Scotia for so long and not had the occasion to visit any mountainous region during that time. So the experience of a full-scale mountain range was new. As I turned off the Trans-Canada Highway and headed up the access road to Lake Louise, I began to feel more focused and sensed that the decision to make this weekend trip was a good one. After parking the car and walking to the nearby lake, from there was an immediate feeling of familiarity. I walked out on the ice to get a full view of Chateau Lake Louise. It was exactly how I remembered the hotel from 30 years before. There have been changes, though. A large expansion was done to the hotel, but it is visible only from the back. The large ice sculpture of a palace was classic. I liked the feeling of newness it created. This is Canada. There were 2 spirited ice hockey matches on the rink areas just next to the one shown here. Here are 2 photos of the well-known view of Lake Louise looking towards the glacier at the end of the lake. The Continental Divide and the province of British Columbia are just 1 mile beyond this view. Today's Vajrayana message. This entrance area for the hotel is new since the Vajradhatu seminaries. The architectural features are very regal with perfect craftsmanship. There was also lovely classical music being played in the background when I was there. Once inside the hotel, I felt like I was in the world of Trungpa Rinpoche and the Vajradhatu Sangha again. It was not an extraordinary or special feeling, but more of a feeling of simplicity and timelessness. I do not remember that this hotel lounge area was used much during seminaries, but it was used during the 1981 Kalapa Assembly for dining and cocktail hours. I also recollect it was where Joshua Zim and Judith Ferris had their wedding ceremony. This high-end gift shop is typical for a fancy hotel. At the beginning of the 1979 seminary, there was a business-like discussion where the seminary administrators passed along a requirement from Rinpoche to the hotel management. The requirement was that the magazine stand operating here had to be closed for seminary, and we learned to live without magazines. Never forget the Hinayana. These stairs lead from the lounge area up to the shrine room and dining room levels. These areas have new paint and carpet as one would expect, but still maintain the same layout as from seminary days. The current hotel staff are preparing the dining area just outside what was for us the main shrine room. This is the same area used for Sangha mealtime during the study sessions. Oryoki meals were introduced for the practice portions of the 1981 seminary. A modern-day reincarnation of a seminary head cook. She is happily on her way to prepare a delicious Oryoki lunch. Today's menu, yes, rice in the Buddha bowl, miso soup in the second bowl, and stir-fry in the third bowl. Please be seated. The main shrine room area would be filled with round zafus for sitting meditation during the 1979 seminary. They would be replaced in 1981 with cube-like red and yellow gomdins. The green semicircle panels at the end of the room open up. The Vidyadhara would, from time to time, discreetly go to this observation area with attending kasung and survey how the practitioners were doing in the shrine room. Rinpoche would observe such particulars as posture of the students and how they were doing with their Oryoki practice. This shows the particular alcove that had the main dais. The raised platform had the Vidyadhara's teaching chair to the right of the shrine, with the Buddha shrine to his left and a similar-sized Shambhala shrine to the left of that. And here the Vidyadhara has joined seminary participants for an Oryoki meal. I couldn't find a photo for the shrine itself, but I do recollect that the Vajradhara image as shown here was very similar to the one on the Buddhist shrine. This is perhaps a somewhat nondescript image. There was a room next to the main shrine room used for dining and for audiences with Rinpoche. Some of us received a Shambhala reading transmission from him here, which was straightforward. However, I also remember an audience the Vidyadhara had for seminary teachers, and the general staff were invited also. I came to this audience with a naive sense of hopefulness, thinking, everyone is doing so well. These senior students are well-established teachers in the mandala, and Rinpoche will encourage them and empower them further. That was my thought. There was an exchange of about 20 minutes. Rinpoche made some general remarks about teaching and then gave an impromptu oral exam. There was something intimidating in the atmosphere. He began with a simple question. What is the defining characteristic of the Hinayana? There was a long silence, and finally one of the staff members who was not a teacher said, passionlessness. The Vidyadhara nodded and smiled in approval. He then went further with 3 or 4 straightforward questions about Mahayana and Vajrayana. I do not remember exactly what happened, but for the remainder of this exam, the teachers were either told they were mistaken or they were simply tongue-tied, creating long periods of silence. It was all part of the challenging atmosphere. In any case, my initial hope that this would be an endorsement that Western students could teach further was totally quashed. I have a thing about elevators. Maybe most people do. I scouted out the area close to the shrine room to find the elevator Rinpoche would use to give the main seminary talks. I thought it might conjure up nice memories. I was a Dorje Kusung attendant and would escort Rinpoche to the talks as part of that duty using the elevator. I found the elevator and looked at it. I felt flat. It did not conjure up anything. Then I thought, maybe if I could get into it and go up a little bit, something would click. Well, it did click. I must have an active imagination. Once the elevator door closed and I started to go up, I had a strange sort of non-thought experience. This feeling made me very uneasy. I kind of chickened out and barely went up 2 floors and then took the elevator back down, and I got out of it pretty quickly. This is another nondescript image, but I have a clear memory associated with it. This alcove is located in a passageway just outside the dining area. During seminary, it had normal round hotel tables that were used by participants for dining, socializing, or maybe a quick review of lecture notes before an exam. It was like a student union building at a normal college. At seminary, I was nonchalantly walking by the tables, noticing several tables in the row with seminary participants doing the normal thing of socializing during a break. Then I passed one table and noticed a couple of students talking, but the third student was Rinpoche. I was so used to seeing him in robes, surrounded by Dorje Kasung, teaching from the dais and so forth, that to see him just sit and hang out like a regular guy was completely incongruous. Reinforcing this quirky image of normality was that no one, except the 2 students sitting with him, looked at him, smiled, or engaged him in any way. The rest of us walked by him in a completely normal fashion. He totally blended in as normal, almost to the point of being invisible, and I was left wondering if the other students walking by even saw him. This hallway reminds us of the many hours we would staff the Vidyadhara's suite as Dorje Kasung, attendants, cooks, and so forth. Lady Diana joined the Vidyadhara for a time during the 1981 Seminary and the following Kalapa Assembly. During this time, Ashoka Mugpo was born. A concluding lake view from a perspective very similar to the picture of the Vidyadhara in Japanese Tenno attire. I was getting to feel more at home in the area and familiar with the nearby resort towns of Lake Louise, Banff, and Canmore, but it was time to get in the car and return home to Edmonton. Goodbye to this mountain monolith. The Vajradhatu logo is a reminder of the tradition and method the Vidyadhara created in presenting authentic Buddha Dharma during seminaries. His approach in teaching the Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana gave the students a depth of understanding that would be inspiring to them for the entirety of their lives. I hope this tradition continues and flourishes for many generations into the future.